Good day. This is Eric Mashinsky, Gold Investment Letter, Phenom Ventures. And essentially, this video, I wanted to invite some prolific CEOs in the mining business, folks that have either now and certainly over time have had numerous projects in the metals and mining space in various states in the United States. We have a lot of attention now due to the cluster bomb, which is the logjam of critical minerals and rare earth elements that China has been stopping exports of that are really truly critical. And even these issues, I think the reason why people are very responsive to this right now, and I talked with Daniel from SOA about this. This literally has to do with the ability for America to defend our country. You know, you look at antimony in over 300 different munition products, and China controlling virtually with the processing close to 90% of that market. And that's why they cut antimony off. That's why they cut gallium off early, because you need it for semiconductors. They were responding to our situations where we limited what China could get with capacity from NVIDIA. So then they're playing tit for tat. But I'm sure that with the likes of all of you guys here, I could have told you that this was coming 20 years ago. We all saw it coming. Nobody's done anything. Now it's a red alert. So let's talk about what exactly is going on out there in the field for you guys. And then we'll get to maybe some ideas of how things could improve. So, and one of the things that was astonishing to me, and one of the reasons that propelled this call, you know, as some of you know, I'm extremely active in Nevada, invested in multiple companies, and Rob has projects there. He's got a mine, Gold Bar, that's operating. He's, you know, been very involved in Nevada. Rob, you've been there, you know, in some capacity for decades. And, you know, Paul Cowley, who's running Phenom Resources, the company, I'm the largest shareholder there, and they had been accumulating a package of gold exploration projects, some of which have, one of them, King Solomon, was initially an antimony mine back in the day. There are rare earth elements involved around a couple of the projects. But that's neither here nor there. What the problem is that 6 months ago, I asked Paul, when are we going to be able to drill our Dobbin gold asset? Which I've had verification from outside geologists that are very talented that have said this is one of the top 1, 2, or 3 exploration gold projects in the state of Nevada. It's actually incredible. But I said, when are we going to get permitted? And Paul said, it'll take 15 to 18 months. I believe that's what you said 6 months ago. So now we only have to wait about a year or 9 months, but it's going to really delay the process. So maybe I'll actually just start there with Paul and then move to Rob, who's got the Nevada experience. And then we'll kind of drill in each company and each state that you guys have experience in. And by the way, we're covering some of these situations, like with Perpetua and John. You know, they're building a gold mine, but the byproduct is antimony. You typically don't have a pure antimony mine. It's a byproduct of other metals. So, but we're also dealing with copper. We're dealing with silver. We're dealing with other critical minerals. We have a situation at International Tower Hill that Karl runs in Alaska with substantial antimony within their gold asset that they're studying right now. Mike Blady has had a lot of experience with the uranium side of things, and he has run into certain challenges in states, I believe, like South Dakota, which makes you just throw up your hands and say, forget it. So, Paul, maybe you can speak to this, because this is really surprising. Nevada is supposed to be one of the friendliest places on the planet to do business in the mining sector. That has just been an assumption for a long period of time. That's what it's pitched as. when I heard this situation about how long it was going to take to simply get an exploration permit for King Solomon and Dobbin, King Solomon, by the way, has had drilling on it decades ago. You know, but there are, maybe you can explain what you deal with. So we have the Bureau of Land Management, the BLM, then we have the Forestry Service, and there's not much communication with these entities. But what has been your experience and frustration? Let's just use like those two projects as an example.
Sure.
What's going on there?
Well, yeah, thanks very much. I'm Paul Cowley with Phenom Resources here. We've spent over $20 million on our exploration projects in critical metals and gold. And we have projects that are in the high desert plains terrain that's been administered by the BLM. That's a very easy process, getting permits within 30 days. It's all reasonable. We get bonds. We do go in, do our exploration. If it amounts to something, we carry on and upscale our bonding and the permitting process as well. But generally, you need to start with a small permit of under 5 acres, and so that's not a very, very big footprint. It takes BLM on federal lands to 30 days to get your permit. Very prescribed because it's legislated now, and so that works. But we have these other projects that are in forested terrains in Nevada, and it does not work with the way, because those are administered by the Forest Service. It's a different Department of Energy. It doesn't work. It's an absolute nightmare. And really what has happened, and it wasn't always this way. 30 years ago, you could deal with Forest Service in Nevada, and they had, the attitudes, the people that were involved, the bureaucrats, it was all reasonable, and with proper due care. But since then, there's been this blanket attitude of obstruction by the Forest Service bureaucrats. So basically, it's designed to wear you down, wear the explorer down, and with excessive costs and excessive and unpredictable timelines. 1.5 years is only a guess. It could be much, much longer. And so basically, they wear the companies down so that eventually they'll walk, even for the simplest, less than 5 acre area. And that's where wealth creation starts. You got to start with a small exploration permit. If you can't get that, you'll never grow into something much bigger. So it's, obviously what has happened in our case, there's some illustrations here, is this King Solomon one. It's an exceptional good gold and antimony project. Prior to us, there have been 5 companies, a progression of 5 companies who've owned it, all had strong beliefs that there was potential there, all wanted to spend money. But after 5 years of holding it, each one of them systematically dropped out of the picture because of just shaking their heads, because you can't deal with the delays. They know every trick in the book in terms of delaying. And basically over 30 years, with 5, 6 different companies, there hasn't been a single drill hole been allowed. I think that's criminal.
Well, that's also Paul, just 1 second. That's insane that it's in the state we're talking about as well, right? So, yeah. You have, and I just want to say this too, because the reality is that nobody I know on this call, or anybody that I've ever met that is in the mining business, wants to harm the environment.
No,
okay,
we're all naturalists.
We're all trying to do your best. And I'm excited to talk with Rob about some of the innovative things that he's done in Argentina, which could be a wonderful example going forward. But Paul, you had mentioned that you believe there's one individual. So how much of this is a bottleneck of people? Andy's a dickhead, apparently, but he's got up to 30% of the permitting requests in Nevada held up with one individual that it's up to him to approve. Is that correct?
That's how, yeah, it's not only the overall blanket attitude of the Forest Service, which has to be changed from the top down. But yeah, it boils down to a third of the state is controlled by one individual, one forester, who is very, very good at making delaying. in every respect, and he's holding up wealth creation. Literally, one individual has that power, which is an abuse of power in my view, and it really needs to be changed. Not necessarily change that person out, because there'll be another bureaucrat with the same attitude coming in. So it's got to be a policy, top down change in legislating timeframes, reasonable timeframes. Maybe the Secretary of Interior, which looks after BLM, and the Secretary of Agriculture, which looks after forestry, they need to get together and streamline this so that there are permits that are and they're on the books for the Forest Service. They do have a less than 5 acre permit, but they refuse to use it. And so you really need to streamline this for a BLM-led small permit application, get the Forest Service to input, but don't have them as the lead agency, because that'll continue to delay. So you got to legislate a short time, maybe a 1 to 3 month
Yeah, a time
process.
limit where they have to at least, address these things. But this is exactly the type of stuff that we want to talk about. I'll get back to you, Paul. That's a good introduction. I can't wait to get to Steve Dunn, who's actually got a project on the border in Nevada and California, and he's on the California side. So wait till you hear that whole mess. But in any event, Rob, why don't you talk a little bit about so I've known you for a while, and Rob, you're one of these folks in the industry who I think has a terrific reputation. You've had a lot of success, initially at Gold Corp and under your own umbrella here at McEwen Mining. I've been an investor in your company for a long time, also in McEwen Copper, which is a private entity. But we don't need to get into Argentina right away, but I think that the RIGI situation with the tax incentives, that might be something to bring up in terms of whatever can be mimicked in the US, because we either need something like, this is my idea, a capital gains moratorium for Americans, maybe 7 years or whatever, that if you invest in any private or public mining company that's putting the money into the ground in America, you should have a moratorium on capital gains. Now, Canada's got this flow through structure that helps. And maybe that is something that could be mimicked. Maybe it could be something different. But then you also have in Argentina, the whole government is behind making sure that some of the mining projects are being nurtured and clarified in terms of what to expect if you're playing by the rules and building things out in a reasonable way. So, Rob, maybe just first though, any commentary, and I know you have plenty of thoughts on this, but just the overall permitting scenario in America, and then maybe just first talk about your experience in Nevada.
Well, how about I jump into Nevada right away?
Please.
And say there seems to be the logjam is caused by a couple of factors. One, the BLM and the Nevada Department of the Environmental Protection are both severely understaffed. So it's just, and we have metal prices moving and everybody wants permits. So the staffing issue is a problem. Also, the permitting, you need both agencies to approve before you can proceed. So if they're moving at different speeds, it can take quite a while for you to get that permit. And the other part, the president's trying to fast track everything, but it's for new projects. And I think it should apply to all projects because you want to expand certain operations, and we shouldn't prevent that capital investment and employment opportunity from being missed. In terms of, I'll just jump to Argentina, they instituted a project called, its acronym is RIGI, but it's a large foreign investment incentive scheme where they've cut the tax rate from 35% down to 25%. They've removed the foreign exchange controls. It was a difficult place. They've had an argument with the government. You can now go outside the country for arbitration. A 30-year pact with mining companies and other large natural resource extractive industries where this is law, and they're not going to change it. So it's a big welcoming hug to the industry. You're also seeing that happening in Saudi Arabia.
Yep.
I was over there in January. It was the 4th year of their large mining conference, and they've gone from 4,000 people in attendance to 27,000 this year. But I mean, the government's coming out and it's welcoming you. I don't see that happening much in Canada. And I'd say what the president's doing is trying to extend the arms and welcome the industry and the investment in a number of areas. But everybody's recognizing they want sovereignty over resources. And we have large natural resources on the continent, and we should be identifying them and developing them and providing those opportunities to lift the standard of living for everyone.
Absolutely. And really, we've seen some of the investments that the government has made in Lithium Americas recently, MP Materials, which it's a rare earth project here in the US that went bankrupt before, because China, with their control of the markets, has been known to suppress prices to drive everybody else out of business. And there's a whole schematic there. But the bottom line is that the US and Canada, as close allies, for example, when you're dealing with just the critical mineral piece. But again, remember, when you're talking about anything to do with clean battery metal energy, for example, we're talking about silver. You've got lithium. Copper is an enormous piece of this equation. There are regular base metals that are also very, very important. And we have these resources. I'll speak to the US, but also Canada. We have these resources in our backyard. So why are you trying to do a deal with rare earths in Ukraine that doesn't even have that many rare earths, by the way? And if they could get them out, they'd get them out. And then you also are going to deal with another friction of having to rely on a foreign nation that at that point, by the time they get that stuff out of the ground in 20 years, Putin's successor might say, we want that. So then we're back in the same boat as we're dealing with China. So the money needs to go in the ground here, not only for the critical minerals, but for everything. So to open that spigot up, like Rob said, Saudi Arabia, Argentina, they're welcoming. And McEwen Mining, Rob's company, has, I believe it's the 9th largest undeveloped, and now it's being developed, copper asset in the world, Los Azules. It's massive. And so that's where this RIGI came in. The Minister of Economics, or the Minister of the Economy, came out, and this hit news wires that this RIGI program, I believe it's in the high 2 billion area in terms of tax incentives and things to motivate Rob to build that mine, or somebody to build that mine, and or to raise the money for it, because then you don't have the question marks about what can happen with the crazy government that goes bust every 7 years. So Saudi Arabia also is very welcoming because they have an untapped mining industry. But in the United States, what we're all about here too, now the government giving money to projects in the US and Canada, I think is a good thing. There's grants, there's loans, and John Cherry will speak to this because Perpetua has been, I think, sort of the like a leader as an example of attracting various government entities to give them capital to speed up their process, really to build a gold mine, but it's for the byproduct, the antimony, but it's a great model to look at. So the goal here is something that I think is aligned, whether you're on the left or you're on the right. We need private capital as well to be motivated to fund these companies. So look at the example that Paul gave with, King Solomon and Dobbin. I'm ready to write a check. People have written checks. We're ready to go drill it. And we can't. So we're just sitting there. We need the money the flow of capital needs to be increased here. And when you're dealing with the time gaps, whether it's just the National Mining Association with a 29-year average, or if we get, really optimistic and then start to talk about fast tracking projects, I don't care what you do, how fast you try to go, but between a discovery of a potential economic ore body, you can go as fast as you want with unlimited money, and you're still going to take a decade. So that's the problem we have in America, is that a lot of the stockpiles we had were given away, 40% plus in the Biden administration to Ukraine. We have very limited visibility on a lot of the metals and minerals that we need in terms of how long that's going to last. And maybe I will segue for now over to John, because they're the really only hope, next hope of stibnite, which is antimony production being available. And so John, welcome, and thanks for joining, because with Perpetua, which is in Idaho, and Rob, I'll circle back to you on a couple things, but Perpetua, which is in Idaho, I've followed this deal since it was Midas Gold, and I know that, you know, the permitting process, even though Idaho has sort of come along, you know, they have this what is it, the you know, the FAST Act or whatnot. They're trying to streamline things within the state to get some of these projects permitted. But I can tell you, even talking with, you know, your largest investor, some of the folks like with the Paulson Group, the permitting was a nightmare, it seemed like, for a long period of time to get this project forward, until we had the whole antimony breakthrough, where in the past, if you had antimony in your deposit, you would actually be penalized for that. And now you can actually be, it can be a motivator to build a mine. So John, maybe you can just speak to your project, the stibnite project in Idaho, and, you know, to the topic that we're talking about here. What do you, you know, what do you see? What are you seeing? And I know you guys are looking at, I think the projection is to start actually mining ore in 2029. I'm going to bet you $1 it'll be at least a year later, but, you know, we'll see. Maybe you could do it even quicker. Usually these things are just very, very arduous and complicated. But tell us about your project, which I know also with the antimony, at least in non-war time, you guys think that you could supply up to like a third of the needs of the country.
Yeah, so I appreciate the invitation and the topic here. That this is near and dear to my heart. I'm actually an environmental engineer by training, and I've spent over 36 years in the industry, my entire career designing, permitting, and building mines exclusively in the United States. And I've gotten 2 or 3 of them actually permitted and into construction, some into operations. Look, and I've got the battle scars to prove it too. You know, the National Mining Association report shows on average 29 years. That's the average, 29 years from discovery to production. So only one country worse in the world than the United States, and that's one of the countries over in Africa. What I have to say is a couple of things specific to our project. We've been permitting the project for about the last 7 to 10 years, depending on how you want to count things. It's a gold project with a nice byproduct of antimony. It comes out of the ground together. We got to separate the antimony from the gold anyway. And we have the byproduct. This mine was originally built and operated during World War II in the Korean War effort, and supplied about 90% of the antimony and 50% of the tungsten for the war effort back then. So it's a very well established, it's the only reserve, SK1300 reserve of antimony in the United States. What's been very unique about this project is the economics are all driven by the gold, but the fact that we can produce about 35% of the US demand for antimony, and of the 35%, the US military needs about 10% of that for the antimony, or the antimony trisulfide that goes into those 300 munition products that you were mentioning before. What happened is, even before China implemented the export ban, as you know, they process about 90% of the antimony worldwide. Even before that, U.S. military and their contractors were getting almost all their antimony out of China. And then that actually got slowed down and cut off before the formal export ban came into place. So when the military recognized this, and they knew that antimony had been mined out here before, they really got behind the project, and the Department of Defense gave us an $80 million grant for 3 specific purposes. The purposes were to do the basic engineering on the project, to do the permitting of the project, and to develop and run a pilot plant to demonstrate that we can still meet the military specification for the antimony trisulfide. So that was ongoing. And our project is somewhat apolitical. We actually got our first federal approval under the Biden administration. We got our final permits and really a ramp up in support under the Trump administration. Really around antimony is the enabler of our project because of the national defense aspect related to that, and then the gold is the economics, and that's what's driving the project. But look, throughout my career, I've never really seen the alignment of things the way they are right now, whether it's the gold price, the antimony price, the export ban, the military's need for this. You know, having a critical mineral obviously helps. The Trump administration earlier this year, they put out a couple of executive orders on critical minerals. They listed the top 10 and then another subsequent 10 critical mineral projects in the country. And they put them into what was called the Transparency Project, where they weren't really taking any shortcuts on environmental reviews. What they were doing is trying to make it way more efficient. So rather than going from one agency to another in series, and many times having conflicting priorities and approvals, they got everybody in the same room at the same time, and they sorted stuff out to make it much more efficient. I spend about a week a month in Washington, D.C., typically meeting part of that with the Pentagon, part of that with the White House. But it has really been amazing to me the effort that has gone into fast tracking the permitting. And look, there's a couple of issues on the permitting side. And again, having done this a long time, the stuff that was being discussed in Nevada, you know, BLM holds the mineral rights and some surface rights, but many times the BLM will have the mineral rights that you have to apply for the permit for, but it's on Forest Service land. So the surface is run by the Forest Service, so you got to go through them. You know, long term, you know, if we could get back, there's rumblings of reestablishing the U.S. Bureau of Mines. I think that would be a great start, and you put all mining and all mine permitting under the U.S. Bureau of Mines, and probably run it that way. There's also a lot of I've been beating the drum for permit reform for many years. And that there's two issues with permitting reform. One is everyone wants to put deadlines in, and fully support that. The problem is the way the game that gets played is you have career bureaucrats that maybe are not interested in mining or don't want to see mining. For example, the Forest Service historically was there to manage timber. And over the decades, it turned into almost a national park type mentality where it was preservation at all costs, right? And no longer managing things. I'm starting to see that turn back around here a little bit. They are cleaning house in some of these agencies. But going back to the deadline, the thing you got to remember, and I've seen this tried before, people will put in a deadline, and a deadline doesn't mean that you get to a yes. For example, they put in deadlines of 2 years. You get to the end of the 2 years, and typically what will happen at that point is a career bureaucrat will say, unless we do one more study or we take more time to do this, you're going to get a no. So they'll meet the deadline, but the deadline isn't necessarily a yes. And so the way they play the game a lot of times, they'll say, well, let's do one more study. Let's do one more study, rather than saying no many times. So we got to be smart about how to tackle that issue. And look, to be fair, I mean, projects and you know, most mining companies, they want to follow the law, they want to do the right thing, and they do the right thing, but there's got to be an end to the process and not having it get dragged out. The other part, and again, I've got the battle scars on every project I've done in the U.S. And one of my favorite phrases in the U.S. is the final phase of permitting in the U.S. is litigation. Yep. It just is, and every project I've done, we've ended up on that. So at the end of the day, I think there also has to be some tort reform. We need to work out permit reform, but there also has to be some type of tort reform in the process. You know, some ideas that we've kicked around on that. You know, if you could go back to kind of like a loser pays type of a scenario, that would really ratchet down frivolous lawsuits probably. If you did it that way. There's some other ideas that have been kicked around. Congressman Pete Stauber out of Minnesota, I used to work with him when I was at Polymet. He's one of the big champions in Congress. There's a handful of others that I know and we've worked with out there. They're very interested in permitting reform, whether it's Rosemont type fixes, whether it's environmental permitting, whether it's, getting back to maybe a US Bureau of Mines and putting all the mines in a basket to make it more efficient that way. But yeah, there's a lot of things happening behind the scenes in the US right now under this administration to try to address some of these situations. So sorry for the long soapbox, but I'm pretty passionate about this, and I've been fighting this battle for a long time.
It's all very, very helpful, John. Thank you. And I've got to go. And I just have to say, I didn't finish my last comment about, people that are on the left that are worried about the environment at all costs. First of all, I think there needs to be some level of understanding that not everybody's out here trying to, make toxic streams and kill animals. There's ways to be able to build these mines now that are much, much safer. But here's the other thing. If liberals want to throw wrenches in the court system into projects that are about to be permitted and producing, they have to realize that they can't also have clean energy, because if you want off hydrocarbons, or if you want anything from solar to wind to lithium ion batteries to vanadium redox flow batteries to one of the cleanest big energy sources, which is nuclear with uranium, you have to mine the material. It's all connected. And it's all connected, by the way, straight to the top in terms of how quickly we're going to be able to produce AI, because it's all based on limits of compute and energy. And these things are all connected. So it's not in the interest of anybody, regardless of the aisle that you're on, to just try to stop everything. So I'm really excited to talk with Karl about Alaska, and Mike as well, but I've got to go based on where we ended up with your comments, John. I got to talk to Steve Dunn. So Steve has been, just arduously trudging through, taking this project in California. It's a copper asset. Through a PEA stage, now set up for pre-feasibility. And we're going to get into this with Alaska. It certainly isn't, as bad. But in California, we've seen now when anything is getting approved, and there are mines operating in California. There have been for centuries, decades at least. But basically, we will see exactly what John was talking about. It's the litigation, folks. So something gets approved, and then all of a sudden you have NGOs and people that are trying to save the world and the environment, that just their strategy is to lock up the projects in the court system, not necessarily to win, but to just delay and frustrate and get them so that they're not actually built. So, Steve, why don't you talk to us about, and we've also got this Fast 41. There are some of these programs that can end up helping in certain states with getting a little bit of priority. But what have you been facing in California in terms of even just keeping your company afloat and moving the project forward over the last 5 or 10 years, when everybody thinks nobody's ever going to approve a new copper mine in California? And where does it stand now, and where do you think it goes?
Derek, right now we have a resource of 3 billion pounds of copper, and as you said, we've had 2 PEAs done. So we're actually getting ready to submit a permit to build a mine. We're thinking just the oxide initially, and we should be ready in about 6 months' time to submit a permit. In the meantime, we'll also be submitting a permit to build a portal to initially do some testing on the oxides. So far, we've had very good experiences with the Forest Service. We are on Forest Service land for the most part, although we do have some 2 old mines on patents. To date, the Forest Service has been very receptive to giving us permits for drilling. We're about to see whether or not they'll be receptive in terms of building the portal. Hopefully in about 2 months' time, we'll know, and then submitting the permit application to actually build an oxide operation. So we've also had discussions with the permitting council, and I've actually found them to be very supportive. We've been talking to them about the transparency designation, and I'm actually impressed by their attitude. The 2 problems I've had moving this project forward have been Number one, Bay Street. Bay Street has been a non-believer in anything to do with California since I've had this project. And number two, it's been the activists on the ground. They've been stirring things up. They know we're coming down. They know we're about to apply for permits. And I've had problems with them. They'll go to any end to put sound bites into the media to make things look difficult. So those have been our two problems.
That second group was who? You said Bay Street, and then the last one was
The activists,
the activists,
environmental
right?
activists.
Yeah, because that's what we're dealing with here, where it's nice to hear that you've got Forest Service that has been, fairly productive with you. But then if they let you go forward on building the portal and even building an oxide operation, the activists show up and they're going to sue you.
Yeah.
It's guaranteed. How do we stop that? So that's where we get the tort reform, perhaps. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a big problem.
Yeah, let me jump in here on that. So look, you got to remember a lot of these NGO groups, the way that they raise money is they have to have an issue to fight, so they can put up a web page and ask for donations. If they don't have an issue to fight, they have no revenue coming in. So that's part of the equation. And to Steve's point, especially over the last year or so, last couple of years in our case, we've actually had a great relationship with the Forest Service. They approved our project. We actually broke ground on our project yesterday. And so a couple of sound bites or data points for everyone to be aware of. The current chief of the Forest Service, we actually had him out here on site a couple of weeks ago. He's actually from Idaho. He's very, very supportive of mining. Tom Schultz is his name. Very, very supportive of mining. So if you can get to Tom at the head of the Forest Service, you have a very good advocate for mining. The other thing to remember is that the Forest Service sits underneath the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The Deputy Undersecretary, her name is Kristen Sleeper. She is also a very huge supporter of mining. She was actually out at our kickoff celebration here several weeks ago and made some remarks there. So there is a lot of support for mining in the administration right now, both in the Forest Service and kind of their parent department. We're hearing similar things with Secretary Burgum in the Department of Interior, who sits on top of the Bureau of Land Management. These guys are all in right now on mining and redeveloping and onshoring mining in the U.S. where it's been gone for several decades.
Well, that's great. I mean, it sounds like Paul, maybe this guy that's holding everything up in Nevada just doesn't like the way you look.
Just a recommendation on that. If that's where you're stuck, Paul, go to the Forest Service chief, or even the next step up, go to the Department of Agriculture, to the Deputy Undersecretary, and they are looking for bottlenecks like that, and they are willing to get back to normal business is kind of my view.
Well, I'll get the contacts from you, John, if it's possible. Any direct ones that you have, I'd really appreciate that. Yeah,
I'll make that intro. And Daniel, this is where the whole thing comes full circle into SOA's objectives, with making sure that we can defend our nation in 5 years, 10 years, whatever else. I mean, this is extremely important, and there's such a lag of time. So that's why I'm really glad Daniel's on here today, and we're going to send this around to some of the other folks that care about these initiatives that he knows that are involved with SOA already and or around the Hill, just to educate them about some of these things that we're running into all over the place. There's some progress, but it's still very fragmented. And before I get to you, Karl, about Alaska, I know Rob's got a hard stop coming up here. Rob, so what do you think? What would you, if you're looking at doing more business in the US and building more mines? I know you're a global company. From the federal aspect, where I threw out, this sort of capital gains moratorium to incentivize Americans, because there's public funds, and we're seeing some of that move into particular companies. But if we really want the flow of capital to roll, it's got to be private money. And so Americans don't even really understand anything about mining nor care like Canadians or Australians do. But if they have all of a sudden, they can be a patriot and invest in something that might have a byproduct of a rare earth element or whatever else and have an incentive. What do you think could be something that would be considered by the current administration in terms of tax sort of incentives and or reforms? Is it more of like, the flow through model? Do you believe that that's effective in Canada, or do you have any other thoughts?
Well, the flow through model is basically you're selling your exploration expenses to the public and getting a write-off as a result of that. That's only, and there's a modified one for development. The premium's not as great. Something like that would be useful. I think your tax rate in America is better than in Canada, so people would in Canada go to it maybe faster. You have other options. I think your organization of this call and making a message to the government that the best way to do this is to speed up the permitting. And if there are areas where there, manpower shortages, and which is facing the entire industry, it's not just the regulators, it's throughout the industry, is to start talking in very positive tones about the mining industry. One of the things we're doing in Argentina, I brought an architect in several years ago to sit down with all of our management and consultants for a copper project and said, hey, we need to come up with a way to persuade the general public that mining, that negative view they have, is outdated, and that the industry is much more responsible today than the images they hold in their mind of 25 or 50 years ago. And that to show them. And then going to everybody that provides services to our industry, that they should also be speaking in positive terms, whether it's lawyers, accountants, consultants. And I just feel there's a full-on, full court press on who we pay taxes to, who we pay services to, that we should be saying, look, your future revenue is dependent on us, and at the government, the security of the nation. And so let's get much more positive news out there so the public embraces it, so that we can.
Well, Rob, you also with Los Azules, I mean, your mine plan, you're basically, if I recall, you're looking at running that purely on renewable energy, right?
That's because one of the power companies, one of the big power companies in Argentina, YPF, has they've said they'll give us all renewable energy, but it's based on solar, wind, and hydro.
Okay.
That availability.
Super. That's awesome. Very, very good. And, Karl, Alaska, you've been there for a long time. This Live and Good project under International Tower Hill Mines is a massive gold deposit. And, now with this new element of the antimony possibility, the reason that gets me excited, which I don't know that it should so much, but maybe you could talk about how has the journey been with going through the process to move Live and Good forward in Alaska, and then also, do you see now some changes? I think you had mentioned to me a couple of months ago that the attitude, like some of these folks are also saying, is like gotten a little bit more positive. But there's always been this stigma around Alaska because it's so beautiful and nature's so great. Like, there's reluctance to build mines, even though there are operating mines there. But do you see a potential spark with regard to if you end up proving out some economic benefits with antimony production to be able to build your gold mine like Perpetua has? But maybe just speaking to what we're talking about, I'm sure you have thoughts on the federal side and, in your state.
Yeah, well, thanks, Eric, and thanks for the discussion. First, I have a few battle scars, not as many as others, but I was Alaska Regional Manager for Teck and Sumitomo when we built the Pogo mine, did an EIS there in 3.5 years in Alaska. with no litigation. So we know Alaska can be a supportive jurisdiction, but we also know that there have been recent projects that have faced significant hurdles. So I've got I got 3 Alaska specific ideas and kind of 4 overall general ideas, many of which support some of the other comments of some of the other participants in this call. But first, with Eric, with respect to your, attracting capital to the industry, I really think that the capital will be there, as Rob suggests, if we remove the friction for the efficient application of that capital. And that's the permitting timelines, the tort reform, and those things that we just have to do a better job at. It doesn't take 5 years to achieve excellence in environmental mitigation. We have the science and the know-how. We need to develop and get our act together with respect to permitting processes and support for that. The support for the regulatory agencies, the staffing issues is a big part of it. We've got to ensure qualified staff are there to conduct the timely reviews. We've got to change the framework of those reviews so that we get to a yes, which means successful, viable, critical mineral development for the country in a manner that achieves environmental excellence as well. We can do that. We can't allow career bureaucrats to unfortunately, there's a current criteria in the courts about the requisite hard look. So they are supported by the courts in asking for that one more additional study in ad infinitum. And that's we can't allow that. That has to change. We as a country have to establish that not just the production, but the processing, refining of metals in the United States is a national priority. And we have to build our internal federal government expertise on mining and mineral development. And maybe that means something like the Bureau of Mines, or at least a focused effort to consolidate that expertise and make reasoned decisions in this realm, which is going to be necessary for our country's survival. But I would like to focus on 3 Alaska-specific areas that are presently presenting friction in the permitting process. Not particularly our Livengood project, as we're just next phase is feasibility study and permit applications. So we still have those opportunities ahead. But the 3 Alaska things have to do with wetlands definitions, the Anilka No More Clause, and energy. And with respect to wetlands definitions, 1990 Fish and Wildlife Service gave a report to Congress that said that Alaska had 170 million acres of wetlands, more than all the other 49 states combined. Of course, that was according to the definition of wetlands at the time. But how could that be? How could Alaska have all these purported wetlands when we're frozen most of the year? Much of Alaska is underlain by permafrost. That means the frozen ground supports a summer thaw within a few feet of the surface. But these permafrost areas don't meet the definition of wetlands. They should not be classified as jurisdictional wetlands. And the regulatory agencies shouldn't have this enormous power to halt or delay development on these lands. Under the Clean Water Act, wetlands are intended to be directly associated with navigable waters. And in fact, the 2023, now this is only 2 years old, but the 2023 U.S. Supreme Court decision in Sackett 2 opined precisely that the agencies had exceeded congressional intent. Core 404 jurisdictional wetlands must have a continuous surface connection to the traditional interstate navigable waters. But despite this highest court decision, federal agencies are reluctant to give up their power and control over these lands. And that includes wetlands, not just on federal lands, but on state of Alaska and private lands as well. And so until this control is removed, many potential development projects do face regulatory quagmire. So what we need now is for the Corps of Engineers, the EPA, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and all other federal agencies to immediately align their wetlands jurisdictional determinations and permitting policies with this Supreme Court decision, and remove this regulatory confusion and delay on potential projects.
That is very important, and I'm glad you brought that up. That's something that also can be addressed specifically.
It can be. The second thing for Alaska is that we need to honor the no more clause of ANILCA and quit putting more of Alaska lands off limits to development. We know Alaska has an incredible mineral endowment. We know that if we're patient and support our exploration opportunities because of the geologic endowment, that we have a potential to support critical mineral needs for America. And almost 1/3 of Alaska is already set aside in parks and conservation units. But the balance of Alaska needs to be available for economic development. And so just to give you a little background here, in 1980, Congress passed the ANILCA, which is the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act. And in that, it set aside 104 million acres into the conservation units. And together with the previous set-asides, that gave us 70% of all national park lands in America, 80% of the wildlife refuge acreage in America, 53% of the wilderness and national wilderness preservation system lands in America. And President Carter, when he signed that, said this strikes a balance between protecting areas of great beauty and value and allowing development of Alaska's vital oil and gas and mineral and timber resources. But in that ANILCA Act, in section 1326, there were several no more provisions. Alaska and its congressional delegations fought hard to establish that enough is enough. And we need these lands to support Alaska as it was granted statehood in 1958. So that legislation says that additional lands cannot be withdrawn by the executive branch without congressional approval, and that further studies to produce more wilderness or withdrawn areas cannot be done without congressional approval. But in the meantime, that's just being ignored. Until recently, the federal agencies continually circumvent the intent of ANILCA. And so we see attempts to close portions of the National Petroleum Reserve to petroleum development, for Christ's sakes. There's land management plans put out by BLM that would put hundreds of thousands of acres into new de facto wilderness or conservation units. And there's been attempts to establish new visual corridors that would preclude development along linear projects. What we need now is for the executive branch, regardless of political persuasion, to respect the no more clauses of ANILCA. We must be afforded the opportunity to provide the needed strategic and critical minerals for the United States. And the executive branch must quit taking the lands and their minerals off the table. Third thing for Alaska specifically is energy. We are isolated from the rest of the world on the electrical grid. We have no connections to Canada, certainly don't want connections to Russia. So we produce all our power locally, and portions of Alaska that supplied our natural gas for the last 50 years are running out of natural gas, and we're talking about importing. At the time that we have the huge world-class natural gas supply on the North Slope. We have a natural gas line that's been permitted in Alaska that has had support from the federal government through loan guarantees, and we need to follow that through to execution and construction, if only for the internal energy of Alaska, so that Alaska can supply energy to the critical military in Alaska, and that we have an opportunity to build mines and provide the energy for those mines that are needed for the entire United States. So those are the three things we could do to make a difference.
All very, very good suggestions, Karl. These are things that can be relayed succinctly, particularly this ANILCA scenario I was unaware of. And if you've got the Supreme Court that has already made a judgment on this, and it's just they're being disrespected, I think that we can get that in front of some folks that would not like that fact. So those are all very, very helpful. And so kind of to wrap it up too, there was one individual that I had invited really late. I didn't give him any notice, but he's 28 years old and a Harvard guy, essentially went to work for a very prominent consulting firm that was working with mining companies and is very connected in DC, basically a lobbying firm. And they had put him in charge of critical minerals kind of to start his career, which I thought was very interesting because when we got him on the phone, we were looking at getting grants for the Carlin vanadium asset. That's the other problem with regard to like even the investments that from the infrastructure bill and stuff that the Biden administration has been putting money into. They just started only putting it into lithium companies and they're one step behind. Like if you want industrial scale, long-term clean battery energy, you know, vanadium redox flow batteries is where you want to have some development too. And we don't produce any of that here either. But anyway, we went to them to just get some guidance on the grant stuff. And then I had found out that the gentleman had left and was recruited by the State Department. So he was then running the critical minerals for the State Department. And I know that he had very, very good connections across many of these because actually, John, two of the heads of, I don't know which departments they were, but they were ones that actually provided loans. Maybe one of them was part of the grants, but it wasn't the military. But in any event, we did that call with a company called Natalis that has this Greyhound asset 21 miles away from you with really high grade antimony. I just wanted to introduce it to them. But he's a young guy that has that experience, and now he was recruited and he works for Albemarle. So I wanted him on the call because he's got this unique expertise from his actual career, but we're being very kind and probably disrespectful to let people know about another alarm in this industry. How many 28-year-olds, 35-year-olds, even 40-year-olds, whatever, how many college students do you know that are actually studying geology instead of coding, mining engineers, metallurgy? We have a huge demographic problem of expertise in this industry that scares me quite a bit. After we have the folks that are very, very seasoned start to, you know, move out of the business. You know, a lot of people that I worked with and have worked with are gone now because they turned 80 and they just can't do it anymore, or they turned, you know, in their 70s and they're just like, you know, I'm done, I'll be an advisor. Those are the ones that have tremendous amounts of experience. Now we do have some obviously younger folks running companies, but you know, when I look around for some of the investments that we have to support specialists and folks that can get deals done and or, you know, good geologists and experience in certain areas, we got a problem. So that's also why I think some of this stuff is so urgent to get fixed right now, because we do have people in place that could move a lot of this stuff and do a bunch of heavy lifting to get us on the right road and on the right track in America to develop some of these projects, both early stage, mid stage, and late stage into mines. But I just wanted to bring that up because that's a problem. It's a big problem. And so, but also just to mention too, because we're so far behind the curve, and Mike, I'll get to you next. We're so far behind the curve with regard to Americans and understanding or investing in the mining sector. It's a very niche area. You know, we know that it's a smaller industry versus look at tech. You know, you have whether it's generalist fund managers and things like that. I think we're starting to see some of those folks come over, but yes, just streamlining the permitting processes will bring in more money, but that's still going to be a lot of the same cohorts and maybe some people that get this on their radar. But I think that's why we also need to triple down and give tax incentives for American investors into the mining sector to bring in another layer, because we don't just need the capital to flow that's there right now. We need a tsunami of capital to be developing these projects because of how long they take, how capital intensive they are. So I just wanted to mention that, because virtually anything would help in that respect. But Mike, let's talk about, and you've got a lot of experience in uranium. So this is an area, and you've got other experience. You're a geologist, but you also run companies. So anybody who's been watching, we had a perfect split. If you take John, Karl, and Rob, you have about a combined market capitalization of their companies of nearly $5 billion. So these aren't little teeny tiny garage operations. But then we also have with Steve, Paul, and Mike, these are junior exploration companies. So they do have, market caps under 30 million bucks, and some of them are under 10. So I wanted that dichotomy though, because we need everybody on board. But Mike, you and I, when we talked about doing this call, one thing that had stuck out was some frustration around South Dakota. But I know you've got experience around Middle America, Utah, all different areas. Why don't you talk to this whole issue, and then maybe any particular states that stick out to you that are either good or bad, as you've been out there, looking to stake and then drill and develop various projects.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So my background, I'm an exploration geologist. I've been permitting and drilling and exploring for things in North America and South America over the last 15 years, and permitted numerous projects in numerous different commodities, in numerous locations. I always thought that, British Columbia was the hardest place to get a exploration permit and a development permit, but my sentiment has been changing lately. I stumbled across South Dakota, in particular areas around Edgemont, southwestern South Dakota, which is incredibly economically depressed, has a long 30-year history of uranium mining, exploration, exploitation, as well as even there used to be a uranium mill there. There was over 200 small mining companies back in the 50s and 60s there, and a great geology, exactly the same formations and opportunities that you see across the border in Wyoming, which is being exploited and developed in an environmentally friendly and sustainable way. So I thought it was a good opportunity to start picking up some ground and developing some of these projects in South Dakota. Unfortunately, what I've come into and ran into is probably one of the most frustrating situations that I've seen in my experience over the last 15 years. I have I'm permitting both state land, which I'm dealing directly with the state, and I'm also permitting some Forest Service land as well right now. The state land and the people at the state, they're great to deal with. They support development, they support mining. The problem is the legislation, right? You get a timeline of 6 months, and now I'm sitting here 18 months later, and I'm dealing with people that are protesting my exploration permit from different states, from halfway across the country, right? And there's just no way, even with the legal representation I've hired, same law firms that have helped PowerTech and Encore Energy in the past, to bypass this situation. We're dealing with a brownfield site that is geologically contaminated just because of the formations that have formed over millions of years. And I'm getting pushback from people all across the US because of NGO groups that have, gone on Facebook and rallied people that, have no knowledge, they have no experience, they have no education, and yet it's delaying my exploration permit because that's the legislation now. People have a chance to intervene in things that they know nothing about, and really what's happening online is there's a lot of fear mongering. There's a lot of pseudoscience going around. My permit is approved by the state, and now it's the interveners have a chance to protest my permit. And I'm gearing up for a mineral board hearing, which was supposed to happen in July, and it's been, like other guests have mentioned, delayed because of other legal counsels, the money they're spending. Like, I can't do any work. I can't create any economic development. I can't help the communities that I'm working in because I don't have permits. And I'm in this constant battle of negative energy, right? And negative things that are coming down on us. And a mineral board hearing that should have taken a few hours to approve my permits, which have already been approved by the state. Now they're saying I'm going to have to be there for 4 days. Going to have to call expert witnesses. Going to have
Jeez.
to do all these different things, which it's unlike anything I've ever seen before. In the previous years leading up to this, I've done my environmental studies, I've done my cultural studies, I've put out open invitations to different indigenous groups and local communities to come see the project. Do you think anybody ever showed up? No, nobody showed up, right? And now we're stuck in this kind of revolving door that, the people at the government are doing their job. They're what good to deal with. They understand. They're mining engineers, they're geologists, they're archaeologists. They know what they're doing. And now I'm being met head on with a bunch of people that, I don't know, they probably got a message on Facebook, and now I'm having to fight them tooth and nail. So yeah, look, it's very frustrating. So I think all the points that everybody's laid out previously on this call are great points and things that we really need to focus on and move forward. And as one of the younger people on this call, like in the uranium in particular, especially in the US, talk about a gap of knowledge, a gap of qualified people. Like, there hasn't been any real production in the US since the 1970s. The people that were in their 20s in the 1970s are now in their 70s and 80s, right? And there's guys like me who see the opportunity and have been able to, collect the data, put together the models, start building out resources. And now I'm just getting stonewalled. So not only do I not have anybody to help me professionally, I have to deal with, a bunch of interveners from all over the country who really know nothing about what they're talking about, and don't have any experience, knowledge, or education in the field.
So is this a situation where the state can change the legislature so you can't have outside parties that are meddling, or is it a federal thing? I'm not a lawyer. That's where this gets tricky.
So the Forest Service has a similar process too. Like, we're scoping now, and part of scoping is they take comments from interested parties. So whether it be First Nations, whether it be local communities, things like that. So, this process happens not only in the state, but it also happens federally as well. For the state, what I've noticed is that the mineral board, the attorney general, the assistant attorney general, I feel like they're scared. They keep delaying things because their answer to me is, well, we want to make sure we do things right, so there's no chance for anybody to appeal or to do these different things. But that doesn't help me. I have
It doesn't.
investors that want to write checks and want to see exploration. They want to see resource growth. They want to see all these different things. And it's hard for me to go back to them and tell them, well, the assistant attorney general told me that they want to make sure they're going to do everything right, so they're going to take an extra 6 months than normal.
Yeah,
Right?
and then they're going to get an appeal anyway.
Correct. Because that's
No
what
matter
these
what.
groups do.
That's what they do.
That's what these groups do. Look at PowerTech. Look at my neighbor at Encore Energy. They've been working on their permits for 15 years, right? 15 years. And finally, all their appeals have been swept and cleared from the Sixth Circuit or Seventh Circuit, whatever
Yeah.
appellate court they were in. And, they keep fighting and clawing and tooth and nail. And having South Dakota as such a red state, unfortunately, the areas where Encore and my company are, there isn't a lot of economic prosperity. When children grow up, unless they're working on the farm or taking over their family business, they're moving out of there, right? It's a
Mhm.
dying community, it's a dying town. And there's a small percentage of people that speak very loudly and oppose these things. That doesn't accurately represent the voice of the community and the greater population.
And that's what, Steve has made a point of that in his area in the county in California. The community wants the activity and the jobs and the revenue, but it's these outsiders. So ironically, I waited way too long to invite Bill Sheriff, so he couldn't make it from Encore, but I wanted him to come on. And then Dev Rondawa, who's very active in Wyoming and loves Wyoming with uranium, but he's also, been very involved in numerous uranium projects over decades. He's trying to log in now, I guess, but we're about done. So no, but I appreciate that on the uranium side, because it's also an important element into everything we're talking about. You've got go ahead.
And I just want to make one more point, Eric, before you go in, and it's in terms of energy in the US. The US became a global superpower because over the last 100 years, they've been able to lower the cost per unit of energy year over year, decade over decade, which allowed the US to develop into a superpower. Under the Biden administration is the first time the cost per unit of energy has gone up in over 100 years. Okay. And this is going to continue to happen unless we get some legislation reform and, get more people like us together to push things forward.
Well, that's fantastic. And so what I'm going to do is we'll cut this after. I'm going to ask if anybody has any final comments, but then, and I just wanted to point out, like, everything with regard to critical minerals, not just trying to find gold and get rich. Everybody's got a tie in here for these very important areas, John and Perpetua with antimony, Karl and International Tower Hill with an antimony component. And, I don't know where the tungsten thing lies with stibnite, but, that's another issue. Then you've got, Mike with uranium, and he's involved in other critical minerals assets as well. Paul Cowley at Phenom Resources owns, the largest pure vanadium asset in North America at surface in Nevada at Carlin, and has patents to produce high-grade vanadium and nickel via petroleum coke ash, which could happen much quicker than building out, a several $100 million mine. But vanadium, people don't understand or talk about yet, but they will be soon. And then you've also got, with Steve, copper and our need for that for so many different things. So what I will do is I'm going to talk to Daniel. I'll get him the recording. We're going to get this out to, many people that we have relationships with. I'm not a political guy, but I am there with SOA to help, and they are connected, and they will get this in front of people that will listen and that will care, and then hopefully pass that around. And then if we get some people that really pay attention to this and want to do something about it and are in places of power or influence, I'm assuming, people can contact me, ERIC at phenom.ventures, PHENOM.ventures, just like that. And if there's anybody on this call that piqued your interest, or you're in their states or whatever, I'm sure you guys would be willing to chat with somebody if there's a congressperson or whomever, right, to help facilitate this, because it is an education process. And I feel like, because of how much the critical mineral rare earth issue is in the news, and we're starting to see a real problem, and it's not going to go away. That's the thing. This situation is going to stay, and it's going to just get tighter and tighter if we don't find solutions. So I do believe there are people that are going to want to address this. And we have right now on this Zoom people that can help facilitate the right way to do things, and that benefits everybody, and make sure that we're doing things in a way that, is not going to cause toxic rivers and whatever else that has happened in the past with environmental catastrophes. So I really appreciate you guys. Anybody have any closing comments before we tie up? No, good.
That's
No,
great.
thanks for the
Thanks very
discussion.
much, Eric,
It's
for
a
organizing
fantastic
this.
collection of CEOs with all so much knowledge and base, and we're here. We all want to deploy our capital, but we just have not been able to. We've been held out from doing that. So permit reform is essential, and I'm glad that this is coming together with you, Eric, and getting this video to folks that can really make a difference from the
And
top
we
down.
need to, at a minimum, some of the things that need to be, zeroed in on, like, for example, the one individual holding up your permitting with the Forest Service in Nevada for no good reason. Either needs to be fired or you need another case manager and them having more support, because it's punitive at this point. And it's punitive for other companies that are waiting for permits too. So I think somebody who could address that hears this and wants to learn more about that. I'm not, a vindictive guy, but what I've heard with that particular individual, and even if he's overwhelmed, he's not very nice about it. And, they stick their heels in for situations where, like King Solomon, you got so much data from drilling. It's not like you're asking to go drill somewhere next to a stream that's never been drilled before, right? So it's just, some of it's ridiculous. But guys, I really appreciate it. This will get passed along and this won't be a waste of time. And let's see if we get a little bit of a boomerang effect, okay?
Fantastic.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Eric.
Thanks, guys. Have a good
Eric.
day.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
See ya.